And you have expertise in three things. But I understand that you have not read much in literature. Have you?
No.
No.
No, I mean, human life is only so short, so.
No, that is why I am asking a
Yeah.
question based on literature. Because I am a literary person. You know Shakespeare?
Yes.
Yes. And Shakespeare has written a play called Julius Caesar. You must have heard about it.
Of course.
Julius Caesar and Brutus were very close friends.
Yes.
And Caesar became very ambitious and he wanted to become a dictator. So even the important leaders who were around Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, wanted to eliminate him.
Yes.
There was no other way of eliminating him except murdering him. They entrusted this murdering job to Brutus, and Brutus does it. Goes to Shakespeare, goes to Caesar, and stabs him from behind, and Caesar dies. And later, Brutus gave justification for his action to the Roman people. He made a statement. This is Shakespeare's statement because we did not know what actually Brutus said. Shakespeare has written, Brutus says, not that I love Caesar less, but I loved Rome more. Not that I loved Caesar less, but I loved Rome more. Now, I am asking a question. You have written a book on Mahatma Gandhi and then Godse. Now, from the point of view of Shakespeare's statement, what is your comment on your own book?
Yeah, well, in that book, I actually write a little variation on Caesar, namely that the murderer, Nathuram Godse, who gave a speech in his defense after the murder, that, that speech of his can actually be summed up in the line, it is not that I loved Mahatma Gandhi less, it is that I loved Bharat more. That's practically what he says. You see that the interests of India made necessary the elimination of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, my criticism of Godse is in fact the same as would be of Brutus. You see, Brutus tried to eliminate the danger of monarchy, in Rome they used to have kingship, then later they got empire. So that started with Caesar. He tried to prevent that from developing, from taking over the Republican government that they had. And yet, by murdering Caesar, he did not achieve his goal. You see, Rome became an empire anyway. It had a Caesar, an emperor from then on. And so the same thing goes for Godse. He didn't achieve his political goals by eliminating Mahatma Gandhi. Except maybe one. You see, the inclusion of the Nizam's territory in Hyderabad, which the Nizam tried to get into Pakistan. So the integration with India, that might have been prevented by Mahatma Gandhi, in the sense that he might have started some hunger strike against any Indian military action against the Nizam. So this military action took place anyway, thanks to Sardar Patel. And so Godse feared that Gandhi would have prevented that. But otherwise, the act was completely counterproductive. You see, at that time, the Hindu political party, Hindu Mahasabha, was coming up. You see, they were revendicated, they were proven right by the partition. They had been warning that Congress is selling out India. Mahatma Gandhi's policies are completely detrimental to Indian unity. And indeed, this is what happened. Partition happened. So the Hindu Mahasabha had much credit at that time and could have grown into a major political force. You know, what happened now with Modi could have happened in the 1960s. You see, the history of India would have been very different. And so that was all prevented by the murder. You see, the Hindu current was completely sidelined. Like, for instance, these millions of West Pakistani refugees could have become a force, a constituency for a Hindu party. That didn't happen because of the Mahatma Gandhi murder. They all hated Mahatma Gandhi, yes, but they also hated him to be murdered. You know, that's not what they wanted. And at any rate, you see, the Hindu party and the Hindu non-party organization, namely the RSS, got the stigma, you know, were sidelined, were organizationally destroyed by the ban and the arrest of their leaders, and they had to start from scratch after that. So for Hindu interests, this murder was very negative. Just like for Republican interests, the murder of Caesar by Brutus and the other senators was maybe not that detrimental, but certainly not beneficial. So you see, I mean, I know that you know, the secularists describe me as a Godse supporter, blah blah blah. That I am not, and I'm not saying that to please them or anything. It's just that if you read my book, you can see that that is a wrong rendering of what I have written. I respect Godse's motivation. You see, he had totally lost patience with the kind of sellout politics that Mahatma Gandhi represented. He wanted just a rational, normal policy in favor of India. He was not a Hindu communalist. He was not a critic of Islam. You will see in his speech, he doesn't criticize Islam at all. He just takes it for fact, yeah, the Muslims are for partition. And we have to prevent them from that, not by taking their Islam away, but just by having a realistic, you know, a security policy, an army that defends India's national unity, not these silly politicians' compromises that ultimately lead to partition. But so, in terms of communalism, you cannot call him a Hindu communalist. So, I mean, you know, his politics are not mine, but nevertheless, they're okay, and they had a noble motivation. But, you know, to then conclude, as very many Hindus nowadays do, that he was the alternative and he showed the way and so on, that is not true either. You see, the Muslims came to India to destroy idolatry. Okay, now I'm going to destroy idolatry too. You see, but here it is idolatry in the negative sense. You see, Hindus are terrible idolaters. Not only do they have murtis for Saraswati and so on, idolatry. That is a kind of idolatry I really like. But they are also idolaters in a different sense. Namely, they absolutize things, even like events or persons in history. And so once somebody has achieved this state of sainthood, he can do nothing wrong. In fact, that's why Mahatma Gandhi could do all the damage he did. Because once he had the status of Mahatma, then he could not be questioned anymore. You could not say anymore that he was wrong. I mean, all the British politicians and outside observers and so on who had to deal with him, they just were exasperated with this irrational man. You can't do business, you know. I mean, they had lots of many different types of criticism of his, you know, half-naked fakir type of, you know, act and so on. I mean, they had lots of criticism, but they were not Hindus. You see, among Hindus it was far more difficult. Okay, maybe he was not perfect, but he was a Mahatma. What can you do? Right? So Hindus have this terrible tendency to idolatry. Now with Godse it's the same thing. I was asked, for example, having written a book which mostly is a detailed comment on Godse's speech, they say, oh yeah, but Godse's speech was already published. What can you add to that? Now, what a silly question is this? This is what historians do all the time, to comment on the events of history. First, you have to discover the events of history, set the record straight, but then you have to put this in a larger context. You see what this meant. Caesar was not just murdered. No, he was murdered in an attempt to prevent monarchy from replacing the republic. And did it succeed? Did it not succeed? Did it contribute to that? Or was it counterproductive and so on? Those are all legitimate questions that should be asked. So in the case of the Mahatma murder, I have tried to ask these questions, or to answer these questions. You see, did Godse achieve his objective? And then, less important questions like, for instance, the common accusation, yeah, he was an RSS man. This is what the RSS wants to do. So you have answers to that. Yes, he was an RSS man, not formally, but he had been in the RSS and remained loyal to what he had learned in the RSS. Right. On the other hand, the RSS itself would never have ordered the murder of Mahatma Gandhi because that was against their interests. They knew what in such a case would happen and what did happen. So those questions should be asked. And so, I have tried to contribute to that. Of course, future scholars may find more or find the same, but have a different evaluation of that or so. Okay, that's all legitimate, that should all happen. But, at any rate, you have to take this fact of history, namely Godse's speech, and then evaluate that, put that into context, add the information that we have gained in the intervening 70 years. How does this throw a new light on the decisions taken in those days, and so on. So that should all be done. But many Hindus say, no, we have this speech, it's been published, and now you see we have a new sacred text, the speech by Nathuram Godse. Come on, this is not grown-up behavior. So, yeah, okay, I disagree with Narendra Modi's punishing of his own parliamentarians who spoke out in favor of Godse. You can do that, and it's no big deal. If you're not in favor of Gandhi, well, okay, I'm not in favor of Gandhi. So, he's still, in that respect at least, he still plays the old Nehruvian game. You see, Nehru didn't continue Gandhi's policies. He was not a Gandhian, but it was useful for his political, power game to promote the cult of Gandhi. And so that's what Narendra Modi is still continuing. So that I disagree with, that I disapprove of, but nevertheless, I do not believe that Godse is the alternative. You see, what Godse did should be seen in its historical context, all that. But, okay, it's just a fact of history, it is what it is, but it's certainly nothing to glorify today.